Here at Edwards Air Force Base, September 17, 1959 is a historic date. Early on this Thursday morning, the B-52 carrier takes the X-15 out for its maiden powered flight.
Hydraulic temperature, Scott? -2, and holding since we passed the tower.
Test pilot Scott Crossfield is buckled in and ready for a ride to 40,000 feet, where he'll be cut loose for the first demonstration of this plane's abilities and performance. Flying chase will be Al White, North American's alternate, Joe Walker, NASA's chief test pilot, and the Air Force project pilot, Major Bob White. All vital observers today. They'll be at the controls of the X-15 in the near future. Ground crews climb in a variety of vehicles and stream out to wait for landing at the edge of the lake bed. Many eyes are on the dart-shaped plane this morning, but among the most important observers are the engineers at NASA. Using the ears of radio and the eyes of radar, they'll keep a close watch on the flight. FM signals transmitted will indicate the condition of each vital operating system. Each movement will be carefully plotted, carefully watched.
Edwards 003.
003, Edwards, cleared for takeoff.
Winds 220 degrees at 12 knots.
Prime responsibility for getting the X-15 to drop altitude rests on the aircraft commander, Captain Charles Bach, and the co-pilot, Captain Allaby.
Any tower, 003, rolling now.
As the bomber climbs out, the litany of checkout drones on. Item after item. Gauge, switch, and control are checked and rechecked. In the dim interior of the 52, Bill Berkowitz, launch monitor, has a close-up television view of system operation. The group has been this route before. 2 tries, 2 misses. The first try never left the ground. The second came agonizingly close, just 3 minutes from a drop, when a frozen valve canceled the effort. Delays are difficult to accept, but each time the system at fault was improved and a problem eliminated.
CPU is coming on now. First. Right. Number 2 on now. Real slow to pick up hydraulic pressure.
Blake, how about it? It's a little slow, but it's up to speed now.
It grabbed off in about 5 seconds, and it did go over 3,600. No flat, 510 on the tank. 3 minutes to drop. Going to jettison. Fuel jettisoning. Fuel jettisoning. Okay, good check. Prime's coming on now.
Seasonal prime, watch out there, can't see it. Yeah, I got, you got a blossom on the bottom one. Yeah, they're both looking good. 30 seconds, get me ready to launch light.
Put a launch light on.
Launch light on, master on.
How about it, Blake? Think we're okay?
Ready? All right, by me, let's go. Okay, Scott, let's give it a try. Okay, Scott, you ready?
I'm ready when you are, buddy.
Okay, here we go with the countdown.
3, 2, 1, release. Got 8 of them going.
Roger.
Heading uphill at 33,000 feet.
Roger.
Looks good across the board. And I'm on number 1 and climbing to 35.
Roger.
Direction looks good, Scotty.
Right on, you look real good.
Okay, fine. One up on 50. Level.
Roger.
The course for this flight is a giant rectangle around the lake. climbing to the north, then making a left turn to a westerly heading and leveling off at 52,000 feet.
Take a little speed when he's off. Right. Left turn. Right. I'm beginning to come around the final part of the turn. I dropped back in Mach number.
The record showed Mach 2.1, over twice the speed of sound, 1,385 miles an hour.
Burn out. Right.
On the first try, man and plane went 1/3 the way to the goal of 6 times the speed of sound. As the X-15 slows to subsonic speeds, the chase planes catch up and the glide portion of the flight begins. Now on a southerly heading, Crossfield begins his long glide to landing from 46,000 feet. Time in the air is precious, and the checkout continues all the way down.
Roll forward. Steady side slip. Very powerful rudder on this little baby.
Got ventral.
Okay, buddy, just a second. 8,000. I want to drop it on the track. Here comes Central now. You ready? One, parachute. Alright, well, fouled up. Roger. You're fouled up?
No, the parachute, well, it's open. It's letting it down. How nice. 245.
It's pretty good crosswind, isn't it?
Little bit, yes. 240. Still 240. Coming down, and it looks good. Nice and easy, Daddy. Short 210.
Maiden flight, a success. Today, flight research took another significant step forward here at Rogers Dry Lake. This lake bed has witnessed many significant events in the history of aviation. Born this day was a new tool for flight research. Using a new machine to probe into the unknown calls for caution, and weeks later the second flight showed that the performance could be repeated and excelled. Digesting the knowledge from these first tries, the program became more ambitious, and another step up the ladder was planned, one that would extend the operating area. Countdown for powered flight begins at midnight. The previous week has seen many test hurdles, each one met and overcome, each one establishing with greater authority the right of the X-15 to be in this fueling area. All the control points have been passed this far, and now the touchy, toxic, volatile propellants are added one by one. As tanks are gradually filled, crew members take long last looks into the vitals, then close the doors. Dawn finds the service carts being pulled away, with the 2 aircraft again standing ready. Even the most carefully controlled experiment has its element of risk, and the sober faces of every member of the team reflect their concern. Each research flight has fresh new goals. Each one is a cautious step forward into unexplored areas. The intention of this flight is to make a straight climb to 80,000 feet, hitting Mach 2 at the peak. The now routine checks of plane and engine pass uneventfully, and just past 9 in the morning, the third voyage of the X-15 begins.
They're on fire, Scott, like shutdown. Plane shutdown.
Shutdown, collecting ships, land on Roosevelt.
In a split second, the plan of exploration is abruptly changed to one of survival as the pilot feels out the plane for damage and heads for Rosamond, an emergency landing area. Never has the pilot been more vital. Now it's his responsibility to get the plane on the ground safely if he can.
Hey, Scott, Jensen, the ventral anytime.
Central coming off now, what?
Is the ventral off? It's off, and the ventral is off.
Roger, through the flaps.
Ready? Ready.
Trouble came in pairs on this day. The engine failure was complicated by a structural break, and both were at this time unexplained. The plane was on the ground, the pilot safe, but there were new problems. Investigators found that the rocket engine had suffered an ignition failure, leaving a chamber loaded with explosives. When this mixture finally ignited, the chamber ruptured. This explosion triggered another series of events leading to additional damage. Under normal conditions, the tanks are almost emptied, but jettison in a nose-down emergency glide leaves more propellants, more weight in the fuselage. Because of this increased weight, the nose of the plane had to be higher than usual during landing. Although the touchdown was smooth, the nose-up angle was beyond the design limits, and the break occurred when the nose wheel slammed to the ground. A day and a half after the accident saw the airframe in its original jigs at the factory. The damage that seemed crippling was quickly repaired and the broken halves rejoined. This whole project is one set to gain knowledge, and even from failures, lessons are learned. The fuselage was strengthened and landing gear was redesigned to absorb more shock. The rocket engines were modified to increase reliability. 5 weeks after the unsuccessful try, the plane, now whole and improved, began its trek back to Edwards Air Force Base. Weeks have slipped by since the accident, but the time has been traded for knowledge. More is known now. Certain hazards have been ruled out. The machine is better, more able. This is the #1 plane of the series, modified, improved, and set to show its capabilities. It hangs frosted, smoking, ready.
And they look very good across the door. Back in the saddle again.
Pouring on the rocket power, the X-15 streaks to a new high of Mach 2.5. 1,660 miles an hour at 67,000 feet. January saw the #1 airplane make its final qualifying flight. Delivery to the Air Force and NASA started a new crew on acceptance check and pre-flight readying. Joe Walker, Chief Research Pilot of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, was the first to show that the X-15 is not a one-man airplane. At this time, 2 X-15s were flight ready. Number 1 was involved in the Air Force NASA program to take the airplane with its present engines and push it to the limit of its abilities. And Joe Walker's first flight denotes the start of this research phase. The number 2 plane was still being flown by North American for investigation of stability, control, flying qualities.
2, 1, 3. Okay, that's nice, Joe. Turn a little to the right now. I would say that's okay.
Okay, we got all 8 going now.
Roger, everything looks good.
Okay, I'll need to check in on how far out I get now. Okay.
The drop was standard, the flight routine, the landing uneventful. 2 weeks later, another new face appeared. Major Bob White climbed the ladder to the cockpit to try his hand at rocket plane flying. An hour and a half later, the X-15 Pilots Club had another new member. The Air Force's project pilot had made his initial run and now was ready to start some serious research flying. The spring of the year saw a flurry of activity with 2 X-15s flying and North American racking up 9 drops with the number 2 airplane. The Air Force and NASA alternated pilots on a separate series of 9 research expeditions, flights that kept inching up on the world speed and altitude records. Both company and governmental pilots kept investigating the flight abilities of the planes in different quarters, feeling out the new machines, steadily pushing the operating area out farther, gaining confidence. All flying during this period was done with the XLR-11, the small engine package. Its thrust of 16,000 pounds was adequate for early investigations, but everyone was waiting for the big engine. The XLR-99, a brute that would blast out nearly 60,000 pounds of thrust to drive the plane to peak speeds and altitudes. This engine is installed in the 3rd and last plane of the series, which has always been slated to be the test bed for this new power plant. And Crossfield uses his time in between flights to ring out the installation. Preliminaries are out of the way, and this run will be one of the final before flight. This long-awaited engine can be throttled, having an idle output of 30,000 pounds, but able to be regulated between idle and 60,000 pounds of thrust. Today's runs are the climax of a long series of tests proving the installation. After this start, they're ready for flight.
Valve malfunction. Throttle off. Reset.
In a split second, years of planning, months of test and grinding work went up in smoke. There was only one real observer, one eyewitness, the pilot, Scott Crossfield. Scott, what was your immediate reaction?
Well, it was the biggest bang that I'd ever heard. Fortunately for me and the airplane, the explosion blew the forward section, the tanks, and the cockpit out of the blaze, or out of the major part of the blaze. And the firemen were right on their toes, and they moved in to blanket the tanks and the fire area with foam. The first reaction we had was that the engine had blown up, but like many first impressions, this was wrong. As soon as the parts cooled down, a disenchanted group of engineers moved in, and as you might imagine, things were pretty well scattered about. We also took a close look at the film that you've just seen, and here are a couple of frames that gave us our first clue. Just before the blow-up, a cloud of vapor appeared ahead of the engine. So the search was concentrated on this area. Following up this lead, we found that the hydrogen peroxide tank had been rammed, smashed open. But with what? Lining up with the tank is the center structure of the ammonia tank, and its shape matched the impacted area of the hydrogen peroxide sphere. But how could this part fail? Likely through overpressure. Now, a check of the instrumentation showed tank pressures far over normal. Again, the question, why? The pressure regulator was recovered and checked. It was determined that freezing caused by the very low temperature pressurizing gas had caused the regulator to stick full open. But there's a safety, a valve to relieve overpressure. This valve and the entire release system was also checked. Here it was determined that a flow-sensitive relief valve combined with a vapor disposal equipment had created enough back pressure to fail the tank. So, a frozen regulator, a faulty relief valve, and a high back pressure relief system had gotten together and we had wrecked an airplane. The entire pressurizing and release systems were analyzed, redesigned, tested, and retested. We ran the combination time after time, deliberately creating the most severe failures possible. Weeks passed before we and everyone else were convinced that the problem was licked. As a measure of how the confidence was restored, here is what happened on the 4th of August.
On this historic date, Joe Walker let out a yip of joy. He had just pushed the modified small-engine airplane to a new speed record, then made his report to the public.
Joe, how does it feel to be the fastest living human? I don't know if I feel much different than I did yesterday, except that the waiting for the flight is over, finally.
60-165.
Call it back area, Joe.
Roger.
Gyro look good.
Good boy. Please, over. Go. Burn out. +3+.
You made it.
At what point did you reach your maximum speed?
If you noticed the vapor trail from the engine, at the instant it cut off, that was the point at which I reached the maximum speed,
Now, what was your altitude then?
around 66,000.
How long were you going that 2,150 miles?
Just one instant.
Then, on the 12th of August, just 8 days later, Major Bob White was up before the cameras after his 136,500-foot record-breaking altitude flight.
The flight today offered, I would say, no problems and nothing that could be considered a limitation as far as man's ability to fly an aircraft.
We'll pull up.
Roger. Right on the track. Your angle looks good, Bob.
You're going up.
Pass 9.
Once I pitched up and reached the highest climb angle, I was very definitely impressed that I was going, well, almost straight up. Of course, it wasn't straight up, but it appears to be that way from the cockpit.
That's coming up on 10 now. Okay. Angle's very good. Going through 11 now.
Burn out.
Out now at coming 12 now. Got 12.6 and 13.
Very sensitive.
That's still good.
Fantastic up here.
What you see at this altitude impressed me as being the most dramatic point of flying at over 130,000 feet. The very dark blue sky and the lighter band that was immediately surrounding the Earth, and then, of course, the many, many miles off in the distance that you're able to see. Looking to the future, I would say that we hope very much, and I would particularly like to continue on in work that would take us to higher altitudes with manned aircraft.
Now the full potential of the airplane with the small engines had been fully investigated. While the number 2 airplane was being fitted with the big engine, number 1 began a series of training flights. The full crew was now given a chance to try its hand at piloting the research plane. Commander Peterson, the Navy's representative, was the 4th man to ride the X-15. He made 2 flights in early fall. Then Jack McKay, NASA research pilot, took his first ride at the end of October. Captain Rushworth, the Air Force backup pilot, was next to show his skill at rocket plane flying. NASA pilot Neil Armstrong's last 2 flights closed the year. Training flights filled the gap while the number 2 was being given a complete checkout with the large engine. Since that ill-fated day in June when the explosion ripped the number 3 ship in half, maximum effort has been exerted toward getting another engine and installing it in Ship 2. Months of work, weeks of painstaking trials, round-the-clock days of final pre-flight were at last put to the test on the morning of November the 15th. This is the X-15 in its final stage of development. This run, if successful, will mark the beginning of a whole new era of flight research.
Camera. Responsive. It's okay down here, Scott. Okay to go? Right. Roger. 25. Pump idle.
Idle cooling got down.
Got it. Launch.
Turning off to the right, Scotty.
The launch, the tank pressure is going up to 60. And I'm going uphill. I'm reading 320. Launch tank is holding at about 55. About 1-2, that big coming open. How's it look, Al?
Looked real good, Scotty. You made about a 10-degree turn to the right when you came off.
With the new engine loafing at idle, the plane could go to 4 times the speed of sound. So the speed brakes are open to stay close to Mach 2.
It's good, Scott. A little to the right, of course. You're okay.
Firing ready, Ralph. Scott, could you tell us in your own words how the flight went and what you thought of it?
Very well, and the engine and its power is impressive.
What was your maximum altitude and speed? Did you have a chance to check that yourself?
Yeah, I got about 80,000 feet and a Mach number approaching 3.
Scott, your radio talk sounded a bit hesitant this morning before takeoff. What was that about?
Oh, no, I think you misinterpreted that. Of course, we've been doing the best we can to get this flight off for 5 years. There's any hesitancy there.
Scott, having observed the minimum thrust performance of the engine, do you think that the airplane now will be able to live up to its design promises of altitude and speed, or will exceed it, or how do you feel?
Yeah, really, without question. I got a little faster today than we'd planned, and we have in our previous flights, in my flights, gotten faster than we'd planned, because for once in history, we've overestimated the drag on the airplane. I think it'll exceed its original expectations.
Just 7 days later, the second flight was launched, and on the 6th of December, the third. Both showed the engine to have all the abilities claimed of it. These 2 eminently successful flights closed the year. But the story of the X-15 stands not in the past, but in the future, when every flight is a record breaker, when every trip away from the B-52 is an unparalleled research mission. Human hands will be learning a new skill, to thrust deep into unexplored areas, capture vital information, then settle to a safe return from that twilight land standing between Earth and space.